or control, let's say, political control of Myanmar over Rakhine in the time of Pagan. There's no evidence. What is ascribed to King Anorata as having conquered Rakhine, there's no evidence. I think that during the Pagan period, Pagan was a very important kingdom, and it's possible that politically extended over Rakhine. But there's no hard evidence for it. And a colleague of mine has collected all the evidence of the word Rakhine in the Pagan inscriptions. And that's also not helping to give you any clue what was the influence. As I said before, it is very likely, given the fact that there was a strong influence of Pala dynasty on Pagan art and culture, it's very possible that whatever happened in Rakhine also in that time, you know, there was a kind of connection with Pagan. The second question is, what was the name of King Bodapaya called Rakhine? The name that King Bodapaya gave Rakhine, in the Khombangse there's this name Mahavihika, but I do not know where he got this name Mahavihika, because in the Rakhine inscriptions it's nowhere mentioned, but that's the name actually that is used there. And Tadong, having been called Yakapura, yeah, it may be that some of the Pali names, you know, of areas have been applied in different places. Dwarawadi, as we know, is a name attributed to Siam, but also to Tanwe. So sometimes these names, you know, could apply to different places. The name Wetali comes from India, but it's found in various places in Southeast Asia. This question is early sources on Islam in Rakhine. Obviously, in the events that we have seen last year taking place in Myanmar, the questions come about the history of Islam in Rakhine. The first thing that I usually say in that context is, when somebody talks about when were there Muslims in Rakhine, I say, you know, in the early modern period there are Muslims everywhere in Southeast Asia. It would be surprising that they were not in Rakhine. The question is then to know exactly where were they or what role did they play. The time, you know, that we start to know something about early Mrawu period is 15th century. 14th century we know about nothing. Islam comes to Bangkok in the 13th century. So from that time, you know, traders may have moved along the coast. We have no evidence about Muslim settlements at that time. When we have some evidence, it starts in the late 15th century. There you have some cultural impact that come, like for example about the coins. So you also suppose that the people are moving there, you know, and people are settling there. But then the problem is that we know much about Buddhism in Rakhine and about the history of other communities. Not only Islam, it's also, for example, about Christians. I give you an example that in the early 19th century, during that period, there were Protestant missionaries who tried to make Christians in Rakhine. Now nobody knows about this, but there were some Christians, there were some Rakhine who became Christians, but afterwards it disappeared completely. It's just a kind of small chapter within the context of history. But sometimes we have about no evidence. To make a full record of this, you know, it's obviously difficult. The best chapter of history that we know is 17th century, as you know. Sorry, obviously, Mien Somwa is, in a way, you can say, is the last king of the Long Grey period and the first one of the Mrawu, because he is a founder of Mrawu dynasty. Mien Somwa
He's asking about the Minsomon. When did he go for asylum, and how he was restored on the throne? Is it with the help of the outside forces or not? He wants us to know that.
The story that King Mien Somwa went into exile, I think it's a later legend. after many years of thinking about this, I think it's a little legend. There's absolutely no historical fact about it. The real political conditions of transition at that time, we do not know exactly. The story that is told by Neme in his Yasume, that he went to Bengal, there are 3 stories. Arthur Fair translated one. That story is very successful. Everybody in Rakhine believes it. Mir Somwa went to Bengal and the Sultan helped him with some support troops. The fact is that there's nothing in Bengal sources and the evidence of Rakhine Yasume is absolutely contradictory. There's one inscription that we are going to publish soon that shows that Rakhine was controlled by the Mon king. The whole Rakhine coast was controlled by King Razadarid. There's one stone inscription that's quite clear in it. There's no date, but the stone inscription says, I can quote it today if you want, I just need to open my computer, but we're going to publish that soon, because I would like to say that this story about King Mesoma going to exile, I simply believe is a very later legend, a story that was invented much later. Thank you.